I was born into a broken home. When Mom was 6 months pregnant with me, her husband sent her and my 1-year-old brother back to her parents while he looked for a new home and a new job where we could all live. But when he returned, it was to say goodbye. My father left before I was born. My poor mom was devastated, of course, and she never could bear to talk about it or him. And I soon learned not to ask. The three of us, Mom and my brother and me, lived in a tiny house on our grandparents' yard until when I was almost 3, Mom remarried. My new dad did his best, but he wasn't my daddy. I longed for a daddy who adored me, who would pick me up just to hug me or comfort me, someone whose love I would never doubt. As I grew up, I occasionally dared to ask for more information. And about my real father, the one who haunted my little girl dreams. And I tucked each clue I got into my heart, always hoping. One time I was maybe 10 or 11 while I was visiting my grandmother. She gave me a box of old photos to look through. Apparently she'd forgotten that the box contained a picture of my parents' wedding day, and I found it. In spite of Grandma's protests, I held tight to that memento and the inscription on the back. It said, Laura Ellen Boyer and Paul Joseph Nutter. Tell me about him, I begged Grandma. Her sweet mouth turned down as she told me that he had hated me and my brother, and that he had gone all the way across the country just to get from us. She had no idea how that hurt. Looking back, I know that Grandma was trying in love to protect me. She probably was afraid that he would hurt me and fail me the way he had failed her daughter, my mother. But I couldn't leave it alone. I prayed for my birth father in case he didn't know Jesus yet. And I still dared to ask, now and then, for a little more information. By the time I was an adult, I knew that my father had 2 brothers, whose names were Franklin and Weymouth, and that he was from Castine, Maine, where my brother was born. More importantly, I learned from my stepdad's mom that at one point, when we were still young, my father had tried to visit my brother and me, but hadn't been allowed. That gave me hope. Was it possible Grandma was wrong about him? So I treasured these little tidbits of knowledge, but I didn't have a clue what to do with them. Then when I was around 30, already married and mother of 3, I had a dream about my father. In the dream, a fancy black car pulled up to the curb beside me as I walked down the sidewalk. And for some reason, I wasn't afraid when the door opened and a stranger beckoned me closer. He asked my name, and when I told him, he nodded and said, "Your father has been looking for you." I woke up crying. I couldn't help it. Could it be? Did he really care? I couldn't quit thinking about the dream. And when I told my husband about it, he said, "So what are you going to do about it?" Ron knew my insecurities. He knew how I longed to unlock that blank half of my background, but that I also feared rejection. But he loved me enough to push me just a bit. "Phone information," he said. "You never know." I put it off for several days, but Ron kept encouraging me. What's the worst that could happen? I considered that and realized I had nothing to lose, and possibly a father to gain. Finally, I took a deep breath and called information in Maine. "What city, please?" The operator's calm voice steadied my nerves enough to respond, testing. What party are you calling? I paused and inhaled another deep, shaky breath. Do you have a listing for either Franklin Nutter or Weymouth Nutter? I thought an indirect contact would be safer and less scary. For some reason, she gave me numbers for both men, and that was all I could handle for one day. So it was probably about a week later when I finally tried to phone Franklin. But it was odd the way I just couldn't get through. The phone would ring busy, and when I tried later, it would ring and ring and ring and ring for 5 minutes till it clicked off. And then it would ring busy. And one time it rang once and then quit. So I finally got the message, don't bother Franklin. That made me wonder if I was doing the right thing, but prayer and my husband affirmed that I needed to follow those leads I'd been given. Later, I found out that at the time I tried to contact Franklin, his wife had been near death. No wonder God prevented that. Finally, with my loving husband standing close by to support me, I dialed the number I'd been given for Weymouth Nutter. The phone rang and rang, and just when I was about to give up, a young, feminine-sounding voice answered. I didn't expect that. I was so shocked that anyone answered, I couldn't respond for a moment. Hello, the girl said again. I swallowed hard. Hello, is this the Weymouth Nutter residence? Just a minute. I'll let you talk to my mother. She probably covered the mouthpiece, but I still heard her shout, Mom! Several erratic heartbeats later, a more mature voice came on the line. My daughter says you're looking for Weymouth Nutter. He's not here, but maybe I can help you. I'm Rita, his wife. Who is this? Good question. Who was I to her? Does your husband have a brother named Paul Nutter? I asked. Her voice was cautious as she replied, Yes. What's this about? I struggled to explain. I don't know if you know this, but Paul Nutter was married many years ago, and he had a son and a daughter. I am that daughter. I heard a gasp, and I braced myself for the rejection sure to come. Then, oh, honey, why didn't you phone years ago? I burst into tears. I couldn't help it. Ron's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline, but I couldn't talk. I couldn't explain. Because it wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation to join the Nutter family, to feel accepted and at home. Words can't express what that did for me. By the way, before we said goodbye, my newfound Aunt Rita told me that they had sold that house a few weeks before I'd phoned. She and her daughter were just there to do the final cleaning. They were there 2 days. God's timing. I'd given her my address, and just a few days later, I received a fat envelope with a long letter from my birth father, introducing him and his whole family, welcoming me into his family as a long-lost daughter. I still treasure that message. And a few months later, he and his wonderful wife, Kay, came to our home in Martinsville, Saskatchewan for a short visit. Too short. How can you catch up on 30 years in just a few days? But learning that he'd always cared changed me. My heart felt lighter. My outlook was brighter. I was no longer the girl with only half a background. I no longer believed my father hated me. In fact, he and Kay had told their 3 children when they were still young that they had a brother and sister somewhere. We were loved. My father loved me. It was amazing. Through letters, phone calls, and 3 visits, my father and I built a careful relationship. It was very good. And when he passed away several years ago, I knew beyond a doubt that we'll meet again in heaven someday. Praise God. But at the same time, while I was abundantly thankful for the loving connection I'd found, there was still something missing. You see, even though my birth father was a wonderful, caring man, he couldn't be that daddy I'd longed for. It was decades too late for that. Maybe I wanted too much. Part of me said I should give it up. Be content with the many blessings I had. But I knew something was missing, or someone. My mother had taught me from the time I was tiny to love Jesus and God's Word. So I began to search the Bible for answers to this insatiable need for a daddy's love. And in it, I found reference after reference to God as our Father. But the word Father made me think of someone stern and distant, not the adoring daddy of my dreams. But one passage, Galatians 4, verses 4 to 6, intrigued me with its description of God as Abba, Father. Will you read it with me? But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. This is the spirit of Christmas. God sent his Son Jesus to show us the Father's heart. Emmanuel means God with us. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Jesus himself said, I've come to seek and to save those who are lost. I knew that. I believed that. But the part about calling God Abba didn't quite click. I learned that Abba is a term of respectful endearment, like Papa or Daddy. I wanted to grab hold of that truth, but it always seemed just out of reach. Until a few years ago, when I was hit with a sickness that the doctors couldn't fix or explain. Day after day, I prayed for healing and for peace, but neither came. And then one night, in a dream, I called God, Abba, Daddy, for the first time in my life. The scene was so vivid and touched me so deeply, it could only be expressed through a poem. My burden was too heavy, so I dragged it to the throne. Abba, Daddy, help me, please. I can't bear this alone. The king looked down and reached, I thought, to cast away my woes. Instead, he gently picked me up and held, oh, so close. At last, I'd found my daddy, and he'd been there all the time. He's the king of the universe, my savior, and my God. The Bible tells us that when we draw near to God, he will draw near to us. He longs for a close relationship with us, even more than I longed for a daddy. He loves us so much that he sent his own Son, Jesus, to redeem us and claim us as his beloved children. This is the beautiful spirit of Christmas. God with us, Emmanuel. So whether you've never approached God before, or whether some kind of burden has come between you and him, my prayer is that you will hear his voice and respond. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Come to the one who loves you. And when you do, he'll pick you up and hold you close and whisper in your ear, "Oh, honey, why didn't you come years ago?" And you know, it's not an accusation. It's an invitation. Merry Christmas.